we go to the next part of this, quickly we'll do some speeches. And the first speaker to come over here would be the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, Honorable Mark Dacoley, and he's also the MLA of Regina Coronation Park.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the wait. So, good evening, everyone. And I'd like to begin by recognizing that we're in Treaty 4 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I'd like to thank Kambura and Urkoff and Abdi and the rest of the ACRN organization for the invitation to speak at this important conference. And thank you, Wangigi, for the songs. Your voice is fantastic. Let's hear it one more for that awesome couple songs. Minister Goodale, MLA, Trent Witherspoon, everybody else, all the delegates. And I've been told that you've had a very interesting conference to start, and that's fantastic. I was thinking about this conference and what I was going to say, and I took some time to think about it, but I came at it from a perspective of as a politician and also as the Speaker and the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan. I looked at the conference, and it said this project is focused on exploring and addressing the human, social, and economic cost of intersectionality of oppression based on perceived race, gender, and religious differences experienced within and by African descent Canadians. An initiative is aimed at advancing the full participation of historically marginalized communities, including the Indigenous people, Ukrainian Canadians, and newcomers through collaboration. I was thinking about that and what have we done as allies and as politicians in order to move this forward. We engage, we listen, we're respectful, we try to be inclusive, but there's more to do. If we at one point I brought the fall session of the legislature, I brought in the imam to the legislature for the first time to bring a blessing to the Saskatchewan legislature, and I received hate mail, and it was rather startling to receive hate mail. It wasn't disguised. There was nothing. They weren't apologizing. They just out and out came at my office with hate, and that is seriously a problem. And but that was one piece. If we as a country and a province are striving for reconciliation, then how are we ensuring full participation of historically marginalized communities? We have a history in this country of treating different people poorly. True reconciliation requires truth, and we have recently apologized, but still we need more. We need to move forward on reconciliation. I look at how we settle people. I used to be the provincial director of immigration settlement before politics. And I've looked at how do we settle people? How do we settle refugees? What are our societal expectations? Our societal expectations are assimilation. That's what we expect. We expect assimilation. You're gonna come here and you're gonna fit in, and that's it. Our job is done. We got you here. It's now up to you. Well, that's a problem. These expectations that we have are fraught with challenges and assumptions. We want everyone to fit in and start contributing. Can everyone equally contribute? No. Do we really misunderstand the challenges? We have to understand the communities and the barriers they face. The barriers are more than language and employment. They're racism, sexism, ageism, ableism. There's any number of problems and issues that people have to deal with as coming to this country, come to this province. We've recognized in Regina newcomers who are doing the reaching out. They're taking the first step to reach out and to foster an understanding. We've had the Sikh community who's planted 500 plus trees. They've handed out meals in north central Regina. We've had our Muslim community who's opened their door to foster understanding during pre-Ramadan and during Ramadan. We've had Intercultural Dialogue Association hosting iftar dinners. We've got Spring Free from Racism. We've got a Representative Jigger we'll be hearing later, but these are all efforts to try to foster understanding and bring people together, and they do, but it's not enough. It is up to all of us, and it's not just the newcomers. I was just thinking, I go, this room, all the people, all the delegates that are here, you're not the problem. You are the solution, but you're not the problem. There's nobody here, you know, that's card-carrying member of the KKK. You're not. You're here because you want to foster understanding. You want to look for solutions. I mean, maybe there's somebody here from the KKK, but I sincerely doubt it. But that's who you have to reach out to. How difficult is that? I don't even know. I wouldn't even know how to start. But those are difficult conversations and challenges that we've got to face them. This province and this country isn't isolated from racism. As a person of privilege, I'm an elected member. We used our office networks. We've hosted community forums that help the newcomer community navigate through the different systems of government. Sometimes we take the ability of knowing these systems for granted, because we all know them. We know how to navigate them. We know how to take shortcuts. We were born here. We grew up here. We've had opportunity, and nothing but opportunity. I remember some of the questions that came from the community. They said, are we allowed, because we had representatives from social services, from child protection, we had city police, we had immigration. One of the questions was, are we allowed to spank our children? Yes, but you can't beat your children. Okay, because they're children, we're telling them that they're not allowed to touch them. Well, you're allowed to parent, but you're not allowed to beat your child. The other question was, can we trust the police? The police were there to build up that trust, but you know, refugees, a lot of people came from countries where you never trust the police, ever. You never trust politicians, ever. So these are important pieces that we have to move forward on. This town hall helped to demystify the systems they would traditionally be oppressed from participating in. The simple act of introducing community groups to the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan. I think there's some, Rhonda, there you are, thank you. Rhonda Rosenberg does an amazing job. Her and her organization, MCOS, you deserve probably a standing ovation, but you do, but we'll save that later. But MCOS and SaskCulture, they just needed an introduction. Now they knew who these organizations were, and they had a network. It started the network. And if you're going to strive for access to resources, for structure, and really, it's all about inclusion. And then I thought about intersectionality. The importance of understanding true intersectionality can be manifested and revealed through an example of a single mother of color being expected to maneuver through a system like income support seamlessly. Imagine a woman from African or Indigenous descent with 3 children, all under the age of 6. She has no access to childcare, no car, and needs to get to an appointment at the social services office downtown by 9 a.m. or any meeting. Now think of what she has to do. It's not even winter. Even summer, okay, but think what she has to do in order to maneuver through all of those systems and all of the issues that she's already facing, and those are amplified. But she's going to have to get her kids ready. She's got to walk to the bus. She's got to spend what money she has to pay for the bus ride. It doesn't matter the type of meeting, but what does it take? And what if she doesn't speak the language? This example highlights the place of privilege that many of us take for granted. The systems in place are for an economy of scale. And what would someone who was born in this city, what would we do? We need to understand, we need to empathize and walk a mile. Personally, I want to say that I support reconciliation because it's more than historical acknowledgement. It's an issue of fundamental human rights. There's still more work to do to eliminate hate and discrimination that different communities face. As a straight, white male, I've never had to defend myself against discrimination, but I can use my privilege and my voice to support people in communities who experience discrimination. So I thought about that, and then I thought, wait a minute, I have faced discrimination. And I faced discrimination. I did a human justice degree. My practicum was in Northern Ireland. Human rights practicum in Northern Ireland at the height of the end of the Troubles. I got spat on by different groups. I've got hate mail, I got beaten up once. I'd never seen that look in a person's eyes, but it was hate. And I didn't understand it. And we're talking about somebody that would look very similar to me. And they spit on me. And I went, okay, I need to understand this better. Giving immigrant women a voice is vital. We sponsored an art exhibit by Madhu Kumar at the legislature called The Stories of Immigrant Women. A number of immigrant women, mostly refugees, had their portraits painted and their stories told, and they felt heard, and their challenges were great. But someone listened. That's the step. Listen to understand. And what are people willing to do and willing to sacrifice to get to Canada? We can learn great lessons from refugees, and their lives matter. The idea that some lives matter less is the root cause of all that is wrong with the world. I'm extremely grateful and honored to be here today, and I hope the conference takes us places for uncomfortable conversations, because we need to have them. Which way you go?
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for those very encouraging words. Now, as he settles down, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Honorable Trent Wotherspoon, representative for NDP, Saskatchewan, MLA Regina Rosemont. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Kimbura, Abdi, all the organizers that have brought together tonight. This is a really important conference and a really special gathering, and I'm honored to bring remarks and greetings on behalf of the Saskatchewan New Democrats. I want to recognize all those that were involved by way of organizations with tonight. MCOS, Rhonda's here. I believe there's also SaskCulture was involved here tonight. But just a key leadership role that the African Canadian Resource Network has played here tonight, and a very key role in building and shaping our province and supporting so many within our province. So a great thank you to Kimbura and the African Canadian Resource Network. I'm proud to be here tonight on Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. I'm proud to be here for a conference that's working to advance human rights values within Saskatchewan. I'm proud to be here with such a diverse and strong representation of the best of our province. And as Mark eloquently mentioned, those of you in this room have been part of the solution your entire lives through your daily efforts, and I say thank you for that. I'm proud as well to live in a province that has brought about much progress. 1947, Tommy Douglas and the CCF-NDP brought forward the Saskatchewan Human Rights Act, within our province, later bringing forward in 1952 a Jet Equal Pay Act, of which I should say was an important landmark, but the promise isn't fulfilled. Pay equity is something that hasn't yet been achieved and still needs action within our province. I'm proud as well to live within our province and to serve within our province that had the Human Rights Commission established in 1972 by Premier Ellen Blakeney and the NDP government, further to establish the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code in 1979, and for that code to have added to it disabilities, as well as sexual orientation and gender as prohibited grounds for discrimination over the last number of years. So I'm proud of all this progress over the last 70 years, but I'm very mindful and very aware that on far too many fronts, there just hasn't been the progress and action that's needed. Certainly not when we look at Indigenous peoples within our province and the needed actions toward reconciliation to address the abhorrent injustices of the past. Certainly not when we look still at the gaps that exist with pay equity, between men and women. Certainly not when we know as a province that we have the highest rate of violence towards women in Canada. And certainly not when we know that hate, racism, sexism, and bigotry are all too real and damaging within our province today. And I'm acutely aware that we have forces that are organized, that are working to walk back the progress and the rights that have been established. That's why I'm so grateful to all of you for what you're doing, of course, in your daily lives, but here at this convention. Each of you understand that human rights are human rights, full stop, period. It's not like a buffet where you get to pick the stuff you want. It's human rights go across the board. Whether it's racial discrimination and hate or women's rights, whether it's religious discrimination and hate or LGBTQ rights, or whether it's the rights of Indigenous peoples and the needed actions around reconciliation, human rights are human rights. And because of that, we know that you can't just stand up on a couple fronts, and if someone's doing that, they're pulling apart the argument and the foundation for rights, for human rights across the board. We all know that divided we lose, that united we win, and that we're in this together. And we know that there's a lot to celebrate, as well as a lot of actions that are needed, but that the battle is real. We come together at a time where we have someone who's been elected to occupy the highest office in the United States, an important ally and our neighbor to the south, that all too often seems to be focused on an agenda that divides people, that sows and breeds hate and gives license and validates those activities. And this isn't just a problem within the United States, it's a problem within our own country and within our own province. It was alarming to learn, I was stunned to learn that over the last year that we had an alarming increase in hate groups within Canada. Groups that have organized, that come together as anti-Semitic groups that have come together that are Islamophobic, groups that have come together because of their hate towards Indigenous people, groups that are organizing as white supremacists within our province and our country. This is alarming, and this is why your actions are so important. It's troubling to realize that after a Pride Month that we've recognized across Canada and here in Saskatchewan, that we've had an alarming increase as well in hateful searches and activities when it comes to the LGBTQ2Q community and the rights that have been accomplished. At this time an important time in our province's history and our country's history, your efforts in this conference serve as an important and hopeful beacon, so thank you for that. And as we call out and stand up against hate, and as we work to build that kind of province and country that works for all. We should be reminded of the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people." Thankfully, this room is filled with very good people, and you're anything but silent, and thank you for that. Thank you for your efforts here at this conference. I wish you well. And as you take these learnings and put them into action, where they connect with those of us that hold the responsibilities that we do, put us to work, teach us as well. It's a journey that's important to all of us. Let's build that fair, just province and country for all, and the bright future that everyone deserves. Thank you so very much.
Now I have the pleasure of inviting our keynote speaker for this occasion, and this is no other but the Honorable Minister, Ralph Goodale, Minister for Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and MP for Regina Wascana. Welcome, sir.
Kambura, thank you very much. Abdi, distinguished guests, dignitaries tonight, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the traditional territory of Treaty Number 4 and in the homeland of the Métis. And I'm very grateful to have the honor of delivering the keynote remarks this evening. And I'll try to contain them as much as I can, because I know I probably am the last thing standing between you and your dinner. So we'll try to make this as brief as possible. But I would like to thank the African Canadian Resource Network and all the partners and the participants for making this conference both possible and useful. You put together a very thorough and thoughtful agenda, and I hope in a few remarks this evening I can add something that is helpful. History is a great teacher. For example, in this, my home province of Saskatchewan, it was 85 years ago this summer, in July of 1934, when the Honorable James G. Gardiner was sworn in as Premier of Saskatchewan for the second time. So why does that matter? The answer flows from the results of the two provincial elections immediately preceding. Mr. Gardiner first came to office following a very decisive victory in the election of 1925. But in the next vote, which came in 1929, while he once again won a majority of the largest number of seats, he was reduced to a minority position. And he lost the premiership to J.T.M. Anderson, who was a right-wing populist who came to power with the backing of the Ku Klux Klan. It is an ugly scar on Saskatchewan's history that insidious foreign organization built on hate and fear and intolerance and prejudice once infiltrated this province and occupied a place of apparent respectability. In the United States, African Americans were the main victims of the Klan's racism. In Canada, they directed their vile mentality against Catholics and waves of non-British immigrants and, of course, Indigenous people. The good news is that people like Jimmy Gardiner chose to fight them, hammer and tong. His core message was about diversity, inclusion, and pluralism. And he won in 1934. That's why his second swearing in was so significant. Can you imagine the damage to the character and the soul of Saskatchewan if the Klan's candidates had been re-elected? Mr. Gardner and the Depression drove the KKK out of Saskatchewan. In that 1934 campaign, Anderson lost every single seat. But the most troubling thing about that episode, as brief as it was, is that the ascendancy of the Ku Klux Klan in Saskatchewan all happened back in 1929 in an overt and democratic manner. And this is not the only example in our nation's history when simplistic, fear-filled populism has diminished us. Think of the Chinese head tax. Think of the internment of Ukrainian Canadians in World War I and Japanese Canadians in World War II. Think of the rejection of South Asians who were turned away on the Komagata-Maru, or the turning away of desperate Jewish refugees on the eve of World War II aboard the MS St. Louis. More recently, think of the torrents of abuse on social media directed against newcomers, especially refugees. Listen to the rants of the shock jocks and the trolls and the bots on the internet, and the alt-right and the yellow vesters and the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. Witness the graffiti and the vandalism, even firebombs in places of worship, assaults and hate crimes, misogynistic attacks, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and the murder of 6 Canadian citizens only because they were at prayer in a mosque. Think of Indian residential schools and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in more than 100 years without reconciliation. Our history records some serious failures. They serve as tough reminders that our pluralism, as good as it is, our Canadian pluralism, is far from perfect. It cannot be taken for granted. Indeed, it is fragile and demands our constant vigilance and hard work. The most recent statistics show that hate crimes are on the rise, and African Canadians are the 3rd largest target. So organizations like ACRN and conferences like this one are very important. With ACRN, what began about 5 years ago as a modest network of people of African descent in Saskatchewan has now grown very substantially. You are a strong voice for equal opportunity and social and cultural connections for the diverse and growing and dynamic African Canadian community. To all of you here tonight who are representing ACRN, I thank you sincerely for all the work that you do and for helping remove the barriers faced by historically marginalized communities. And I'm proud to know that you're among many organizations that are working very hard to keep us on the right path. Here at the University of Regina, I'm pleased to see the new anti-discrimination campaign is up and running. And it's gratifying to hear about the U of R's interactive learning tools aimed at preventing unacceptable behaviors in sports and education and the workplace. And elsewhere around Regina, I've been inspired, as others have mentioned tonight, by the efforts that are made in many of our schools and by advocacy groups like Spring Free from Racism and the Intercultural Dialogue Institute. The Government of Canada shares your commitment and shares your relentless determination to make a better, fairer, and more just Canada. But there is, as all of the speakers tonight have indicated, there is much work to do. Foreign-born, racialized people earn, on average, 78 cents for every dollar earned by foreign-born, non-racialized people. Indigenous people continue to be far too heavily overrepresented in our correctional institutions, and so do African Canadians. These are just some of the examples of serious and very complex problems that we need to tackle. And we have been working at them with some progress. On the jobs front, we are taking some significant steps to help newcomers get their credentials recognized and gain their first Canadian work experience. We have a program called the Foreign Credentials Recognition Program. We announced $10 million in March of this year for calls for concepts, and we expect that to fund 15 or more different projects across the country to help newcomers find real work in fields in which they are already proven to be qualified. And we have developed another new program to help visible minority women find pathways into the labor market. And that program was developed in consultation with ACRN. And I know ACRN is working on a specific project proposal. The Daughters of Africa Resource Center is involved. Saskatoon's Truly Alive Youth and Family Foundation is involved. SaskCulture, the Prairie Somali Canadian Community Center, they're all involved. The details are being worked out. There's still a little bit of paperwork to do, but I can tell you it is going well, and you should have some very good news about that application in the next short while. And in every field, diversity and inclusion are cornerstones of the Canadian identity. Our government is absolutely committed to fostering a Canada in which everyone is able to fully and equally participate in our economic, cultural, social, and political life. That is the purpose of the multiculturalism program administered by the Department of Canadian Heritage. And it's rooted in the Constitution of 1982. Specifically, with respect to African Canadians, our budget in 2018 allocated $19 million to identify and recognize the significant and unique challenges that confront African Canadians and especially young people. Budget 2019 provided $25 million to celebrate and build capacity in Black communities, all in recognition of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. And I know, again, that people in this room have applications pending under those programs too, and I look forward to being supportive of those applications. And in terms of recognition, we've made a very good step, symbolic but important, with the new $10 bill that celebrates the bravery and the distinction of Viola Desmond. I'm happy to tell you, too, that in our last budget, there was $45 million set aside for a new Canadian anti-racism strategy. It's called Building a Foundation for Change. My colleague Pablo Rodriguez announced the details last week. It involves a new federal secretariat to coordinate all of the activity, looking for ways in which we can systemically eliminate bias and discrimination and racism in the policies and programs and activities of governments, and support people at the local level through community funding that will help to support initiatives town by town and community by community across the country to deal with those painful realities that are too often faced by racialized groups, religious minorities, and Indigenous peoples. In my own responsibilities in the Department of Public Safety and in the portfolio that I head, my department and I and our portfolio agencies, which include CSIS, the RCMP, CBSA, the Border Services Agency, the Correctional Service, the Parole Board of Canada, and others, we are constantly seeking to achieve 3 simultaneous goals: the safety of Canadians, the security of our country, and all of that coupled always with safeguarding the precious rights and freedoms that define our open, democratic way of life. We too, in public safety, seek to embody inclusivity, anti-discrimination, and anti-bias practices in everything we do. We are incorporating robust gender and diversity analytics into our security policies, programs, and services. We seek to ensure that all of our employees, when they go to work, are aware of their own unique backgrounds and biases, and are sensitive to how those backgrounds and biases may shape or slant their perspectives, so that they can have fairness as a goal constantly on their minds. For example, in making certain decisions that could affect a person's liberties, we try to eliminate superficial biases by removing names and photographs from the files, and then basing the decisions about the facts that are in the files and not the photograph or the name. And that helps to promote non-biased decision-making. On other fronts, my department is taking a number of initiatives that we've announced recently. We have taken the unprecedented step to list ultra-right-wing, neo-Nazi, and white supremacist groups as terrorist entities under the Criminal Code of Canada. We are working hard with our allies in the Five Eyes and the G7 to combat terrorism, violent extremism, and hate in online platforms. We want the material to be taken down faster, or better still, blocked in the first place. We want the internet giants to be more helpful to smaller technological companies, and we want more accountability for how their algorithms suck in the most vulnerable. We have amended the law to provide expedited, no-wait, no-fee pardons for those who are carrying the stigma of a criminal record from the simple possession of cannabis. The most adversely affected by the old laws were most often African Canadians and Indigenous youth. The path that we have opened up with the new legislation in Bill C-93 provides the full protection of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And finally, we have expanded the Security Infrastructure Program to help vulnerable communities protect their facilities from acts of hate and violence. The rules are now much more generous, and the available funding has been quadrupled for both security equipment and technology, and for training, to ensure that when people visit their religious facilities, their cultural facilities, that they can do so in full safety and security. So we have worked hard to produce better laws and government programs, but in fighting for human rights, the most vital factor is individual human behavior. It is incumbent on each of us, in the way we choose to live our lives and treat one another, to uphold the principled values which have shaped Canada, despite our lapses and our failures, as a global example of successful pluralism. And those values are the sense of fairness and justice that we have, a spirit of generosity, compassion, caring and sharing, open hearts and open minds, pride in our vast diversity as a great Canadian strength. We need to practice the creative art of inclusion and accommodation, to make room for one another, to reach out, to listen to each other, to bridge our differences, to try very hard to understand one another. And then, once we've listened and understood, as you are facilitating at this conference, we Canadians must be prepared to act with and for each other together. Not because it may or may not be in the narrow self-interest of a comfortable majority. Not because we have to do it, but because we want to do it. Because the action that we choose to take with and for each other together is right for the fair and decent and wonderful country that we aspire to be. Canada is a triumph of the human spirit. We are built and we are held together not by the force of law or the force of arms or force of any kind, not by language, not by culture, not by geography. We are held together by our common will. We are a country because we want to be, not because we have to be. And that kind of nation building, the Canadian way, is a never-ending process. We are never done. Canada is now, and always will be, a precious work in progress. And every day, it depends on us, all of us, relentlessly, hopefully, respectfully, nation building together. Thank you for being nation builders.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, for that wonderful keynote speech. I want us also to give another applause for all the leaders who made their speeches here tonight. Are they awesome? At the ACRN, we moved a little bit, although we still promote a lot of cultural activities. We also moved deliberately to shaping policy. And when we engage our leaders, we engage them with a purpose. We engage them so that we understand what they're thinking, and we engage them too so that they also understand what we are going through and what we are thinking, and hoping that in between there, we will sit together and formulate something that works for the good and the benefit of all Canadians, and specifically immigrants. And it's not an option because Canada is sustained through immigration. It's a strategic move. It's a strategic positioning. And Canada will be on top and remain on top of the world if we learn how to manage the very superior and excellent and well-skilled human resource that we bring from all over the world. I guarantee you, even the person who comes in here as an immigrant refugee, they have gone through the most stringent sieving process. And they have been seen to have capacities beyond, if there was a 1%, that is the 1%. But when they come here, we have our own barriers and challenges, and those are the ones we are addressing. But then it is not in our interest if we don't address them properly, because these people then become not very useful to the economy and to the well-being of the country. So that is literally what we are doing. But I also want, as an ACRN Executive Director, I want to say that since we started engaging like that and also doing proposals in a professional way, we have seen support, both from especially from the federal government, but we're also now getting support from the provincial government and other local agencies. And at the back, yeah, let's give them a clap for that. But there are two organizations who have mentored us. MCOS, Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan, and SaskCulture. They have mentored us through the process. And now we are at a level where we're kind of maturing and we are running and we are partnering with the big boys and big girls, including institutions across the land. And this is what most of you represent. At some later time, I'll be able to mention a few. So thank you very much. We'll be coming, knocking your doors, and we'll be seeking these roundtable discussions. Please open the doors for us. Most of the communities we work with, they have good people who have very good ideas. We want their programs to be supported. That way then there's meaningful partnership and you'll see good results. And now, I don't want to be the one between you and dinner. We're gonna start immediately, or this prayer. Is anyone doing that? Okay, bring someone here. The person who is going to bless the food, yeah? All right, sorry, I can't see the name here. Anyway, come over.